Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro, and it's time to discuss Do the Right Thing. It's another video that we're doing discussing a movie that we can relate to some of the current events that are happening, and also Spike Lee has Defy Bloods coming out tomorrow, which we're going to get our review out to you ASAP. Well, I think it'll be today by the time this video. Defy Bloods is out.
Oh, okay.
Everybody, it's out.
It's out.
I don't have nothing to do all day, to be honest. So, will the review be out at night? Will it be out the next morning? We'll have to see. So, Do the Right Thing. Considered one of the finest films of the 80s. Many will say it's one of the best of all time.
Yeah.
Spike Lee's magnum opus. I don't necessarily disagree with any of those things. The film takes place pretty much over just one day on a block in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where we get to meet a colorful cast of characters. We're neighbors to each other, different cultures, but it's a predominantly black neighborhood. And it is the hottest day of the year, and tensions are simmering, and eventually they erupt. If you haven't seen this movie already, then what are you waiting for?
It seems like Spike Lee made this film to just expose. Like, all he wants to do is expose you to the reality of racial tensions in America. This film offers absolutely no catharsis. Spike Lee is not the kind of guy who's going to say, I'm going to teach white America, how to view race. I'm going to tell you what to think and what to do about this problem. Not that Spike Lee has this viewpoint, but a lot of characters seem to have a separationalist viewpoint, similar to what Malcolm X said, where he says people only really thrive in communities where they're just surrounded by people of their same race or culture. And this is like very, offensive to American values, I feel. Like, we're supposed to be a melting pot. We're supposed to be able to get along. And Spike Lee's just saying, like, does it look like these people are getting along? Let's just deconstruct this. Let's just throw a fucking trash can through the window of this whole, idea that we're all getting along and that we're going to have an easy time going from basically segregated and discriminated against Black America into a nice, coherent society where everybody's sympathetic towards our universal cultural values, where everyone's, striving towards economic prosperity, and we all have the same exact playing field.
One of the things that I really like about this movie is that it kind of frustrates me a little bit, but
it definitely
in
does,
the same way, I love it for that because it frustrates me in the way that politics frustrate. Like, it captures the discourse of these issues. The film ends on conflicting quotes from Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. This movie doesn't want to give you one answer. It wants to spark a discussion. It's not easy to point fingers at villains and heroes in this film. It's not even easy to separate, what's systemic and what erupted because people were being irrational. It's just not easy.
To your point that there's no good or bad people in this film, when I did find myself thinking, this person is obviously better, or is fighting for the right values, whereas these people are not, I felt like when I thought those things, I had to check myself and really think, am I sympathetic towards this character? Because I actually don't understand the other side. Am I more sympathetic towards Sal because, all he's doing is trying to just have his pizza restaurant? Or if I weren't white, would I feel differently about Sal's Pizzeria? Does he elicit as much sympathy as the other characters? I mean, he is the most economically prosperous individual on this block. Mookie's right in the end that insurance is going to protect him. You kind of get the sense that his economic status can't really be brought down that far by this riot. He's not really suffering so much consequences in the long run, except for the emotional ones, maybe some short-term economic disadvantages.
At the same time, though, his response to after Radio Raheem died was you gotta do what you gotta do. He's
right.
kind of shit. He's kind of shit, but
And
at the
so
same time,
so-
sometimes you really feel for him. When he's saying that these kids grew up on my pizza, I love that the film paints those two sides of him. On one hand, his racism comes out and he's a total asshole.
He's what you don't like about white society. He's the part of white society that doesn't want to acknowledge
that he has a part in it, in a way. And it's not even his fault that he has a part in it, because Sal's Pizzeria and the Korean grocery store across the street are the two businesses that we see on the block. And we get a sense that Black people don't own businesses in their own neighborhood. They're owned by other cultures. This is a systemic problem, but it's not Sal's fault that he has a pizzeria that he built from the ground up. Again, the lines are blurred of what's right and what's wrong.
But the point of me bringing up like my sympathy towards Sal is that I have to check myself and think, where do my priorities lie? Just like how we all have to check ourselves when we're thinking about George Floyd. Like, do our priorities lie with like the property damage, or do they lie with like making sure that black people don't get killed and standing up for that? And so that's where the film is like really interesting, is because every character does have a story, and the ones that you most easily dismiss, that's where you need to look deeper into like, what is that perspective, and like, where did that come from? It's just a fascinating movie, I think. And there's really not many like it in terms of just like how explosive it is and how much it really like asks you to engage with it, and how little it gives you back.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the complete opposite of a movie like The Help, which is trending on Netflix right now. Because you get to watch that movie and you get to know who the racists are, and you get to know who's like, you know, fighting against the system.
Spike Lee said in an interview that I just watched, like, I like 12 Years a Slave, but I don't really like The Help. It was like funny.
Like The Help's fun. Like, you know, The Help, Green Book, like they're fun movies, Hidden Figures, but, you know, they're movies that it's really obvious to know who's good and bad. And this movie is a total opposite.
It's so desanitized. Yeah. Like I always say the word sanitized. Like I fucking hate when movies are just like wiped down for you.
But that's the thing. Like this movie is reality. Like this is unquestionably closer to reality, because reality is so frustrating.
It's reality, even though a lot of the characters are like kind of caricatures, because you can't really get to know them. So like you have to some extent like make them people you can just, oh, that person is this really fast. The emotional like meat of the film is what reality is. Like Spike Lee doesn't have the answers. He doesn't even say today that he has the answers. We want him to preach to us the answers. Like we want him to give them to us, and he says like, no, you figure it out. Like I don't know how we got into this situation, but we're in this together.
The debate over whether it was the right thing for Mookie to throw the trash can into the window, Spike Lee did offer some words on that, and he said that only white people are the ones who ask if Mookie did the right thing, because one shouldn't care more about the property damage than the injustice of a life being unjustly taken.
I think a lot of your viewing can depend on how important you see the choking of Radio Raheem. Like, how much does that make you angry? How much can you look at the riot and say like, well, obviously, like he just got choked. Like this is awful, and like this has been happening forever. You know, what are we supposed to do when our friend just died for no reason? Did seeing that shake you, or was seeing that just sort of like, yeah, that, you know, is something that happens?
The lighting of Sal's on fire and the town cheering it on, they at once respect Sal's, but they also recognize that like this is just another space on our block that isn't our space.
I don't think the movie's suggesting that there's anything wrong with Sal or the Korean, like having, you know, a business in the area. I think it's just saying like, this is kind of how things are and how they've always been. These people who are on this block like don't really have jobs, and Koreans who are like a newcomer to the United States at this point, their businesses are going up like that. And so it's like, why does that happen? I don't think Spike Lee says he has the answers either. The history of like black-owned business is absolutely dampened by actual discrimination. I was reading up on the history of Bed-Stuy. You had an influx of black Americans to the Northeast, basically people who were trying to escape Jim Crow. There's also factors like the Great Depression, which led to people like going towards the cities. I think it's around the 50s that there was a practice called blockbusting, where realtors would say to white people in these neighborhoods, in Bed-Stuy specifically, you know, there's going to be some black people moving into this neighborhood. Your property value is basically going down. Like this whole neighborhood's going to go to shit once that happens. And so they get the white people to sell their homes for like cheap. And then black people who are desperate to escape these impoverished areas where they're very concentrated would buy the homes that were formerly owned by white people for a much higher price. So real estate agents were basically getting lots of money from doing this. At this time, like there were rankings of like how great your neighborhood was. And if there was one black family in your neighborhood, you would automatically receive a lower grade. It's 35 years until Do the Right Thing is released. But like in terms of recovering from these problems, I mean, you're absolutely going to feel 35 years. Like that is, you know, that is just one generation. So by 1960, Bed-Stuy is 85% black. just recovering from those issues, black people are going to have a harder time moving up throughout the decades. Like, there's no one point where everything just stops. There are absolutely no hurdles. Essentially, like, underneath all of this tension is like literally like the bottomless pit of just African Americans being disadvantaged in the United States and being treated worse than like any other group. So like Koreans come in and like, yeah, they're going to have an easier time. I think it's interesting in the film that they didn't show black people owning the businesses in the area because it's sort of like America. I mean, it's been a country they've been a part of like for so long, and yet they don't have any like control or like ownership in these places. Spike Lee says that he also predicted gentrification in this film. The reason he says that is because there's a scene where a white guy's walking his bike and he rides it over Buggin' Out's shoe. Buggin' Out gets really upset with him for like moving into the neighborhood, being like, well, like you have no cultural stake in this neighborhood. Like, what are you doing here? And, you know, the reason he's here is like perhaps because it's just cheap. And it's also interesting in this scene that the white character has a bicycle and that Buggin' Out has just his shoes. So it's implying that there's like this mobility, you know, white people are able to like access the benefits that society brings you.
And there's that white guy with the car, if you want to go that route.
The nice car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely say that, yeah.
It makes sense that there's like this sort of culture battle going on. Sal wants to keep his culture and his business, and, you know, someone like Radio Raheem goes around blasting like his culture, his favorite song. Wherever his music is heard is like his space, and he kind of tries to assert that space over that Hispanic group of people too. Everybody in the movie is trying to like assert their culture, especially in a crammed space like New York. Like, it makes sense that this stuff bubbles up. There's a section of the film where the characters are like firing off like racial stereotypes and slurs. That could be interpreted as like, oh, everybody's racist. Like, we're all racist to each other. In this film, there's some truth to that each group feels like hostile towards others. But ultimately, which group is suffering the most? This movie couldn't fit today better. Like, it's kind of sad that it parallels it like this, but it literally is about a man who is choked to death by the police and then a bunch of riots start. It's pretty uncanny. And the film also kind of portrays this as a cycle. You know, in the beginning of the movie, you actually see like on the wall is written, "Tawana told the truth," which is a reference to an incident that occurred in 1987 where Tawana Brawley accused 4 men, at least one of whom I believe was a police officer, of rape. And this was like a sort of media storm around this, and there was a lawsuit that was ultimately lost by her. People felt that the fact that Tawana was black sort of acted as like an implicit way to discredit her allegations. Basically just another like injustice that happened. So obviously the people in this community are feeling these injustices beforehand. It's going to go in another cycle. At the end of the movie, they say it's going to be even hotter tomorrow. It's perhaps inevitable with all the tension that's going on, and that tension doesn't get resolved, but like these outbursts are just kind of nature. That outburst is going to linger on the community. Like, they got it out of their system for now, but it will erupt again. It kind of portrays like a cyclical nature to these things, which is obviously like relevant to today because we see over and over again, a black person is killed by the police. People are upset. Eventually that dies down until it happens again. It happens with school shootings.
If the film is saying anything, it's that it's what Radio Raheem says. We're just, you know, in a static lock where we have love and hate. And because like hate exists, it's just going to hinder any sort of progress. And you can look at this film at any point from its release date until today, and it's relevant. So Spike Lee was right. Like, it is a story of being stagnant and being stuck. There's really no easy answers for this film. And like, there's a big part of me that's just like trying to just be like, okay, well, why can't everyone just get along? But that would obviously be a terrible movie. I realize that I also have that impulse because, like, you know, I have an idealism about America probably. And Spike Lee does not have an idealism or rose-colored glasses about America whatsoever. This is definitely a film. I can understand why it's lived on so much. There's a lot you can dissect in it. It's also just like a really well shot, well made film. But there's a lot of like screaming and shouting, and I didn't necessarily enjoy it.
I don't know. A lot of times it's like kind of fun. You know, there's a lot of comedy in it.
Yeah.
Like the community feels good too. Like Spike Lee definitely establishes a love for the community.
Yeah. But I mean, it also makes you feel just like claustrophobic, which is the point. What you are going to mull over after you see the film is going to be unique to you. Some people say the good movie starts, when the credits roll. And this is like that kind of film. A lot of people actually thought this was a very irresponsible film.
Yeah, they thought it was going to incite
and
riots.
It was going to incite riots. And it was basically just such an insult to like people's intelligence. Spike Lee saw it as a sort of racist notion. It didn't inspire riots. It inspired people to think.
It's a great movie. I love the style. Very kinetic. Very like new filmmaker sort of energy.
I mean, and also just huge props to like the studio for putting out this film. I mean, this is like a really daring movie.
Yeah, and I'm sure they weren't making a lot of films like it at the time.
It's a film that inspired others to be made like it.
The fact that studios wanted to finance these films also came from like the rise of hip hop and the popularity of that genre.
And the moral of the story is that films don't have to tell you what to think. And just because they don't tell you what to think does not mean they're dangerous.
I think if you're going to be a film like Do the Right Thing and you're not going to give the audience answers, you're not going to tell them what to think, there has to be truth to it. And I think that there's so much truth to the way in which Do the Right Thing is a frustrating movie. It's almost cathartic that it is frustrating in the way that it is, because it's like, oh, Spike Lee gets what that is. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Why don't you do the right thing and subscribe to this video?